DC used to make my personal favorite comics. I really love a lot of the characters they have, but unfortunately, they changed their format years ago, and ever since, I haven't liked 90% of the content they're putting out. And we've seen larger artists and writers ditch the mainstream comic industry to work on their own projects and to rival companies like Marvel and DC. But Grant Morrison decided to speak up about his departure from the company, and I'm honestly not surprised with what he has to say at all. I have a few things to show off, but before we get into the topic at hand, if you enjoy the content that I create, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Follow me on social media like Twitter or mine so that you can see when my content is posted. And of course, if you do really enjoy the videos and the live streams that I create, please consider becoming a Dark Titan via Patreon for just $1 a month or supporting the channel via YouTube memberships. All of the links are in the description, and of course, I do really appreciate all of the support. So this is a Bounding Into Comics article that I wanted to start with. It says Grant Morrison on 2019 DC Comics exit, monthly sales of new work were on the wane, and audience engagement seemed in decline. Reflecting back on their breakup with the publisher, legendary comic book author Grant Morrison has revealed that they felt it was time to move on from DC Comics after noticing that monthly sales of new work were on the wane, and excited engagement from fans seemed in decline. Now, I've talked about the comic book industry a lot here on the channel. I used to really like comic books, and while I still do, unfortunately, a lot of the content being put into mainstream comics, at least, is pretty garbage nowadays. I don't really support Marvel. I don't really support DC. I just don't really read a lot of comics anymore, but I used to be really big into comics. I collected for years. I worked at a comic book shop because of my interest in the industry, and unfortunately the industry has been in decline for years and years and years now, and there are a lot of reasons why, primarily the fact that the content that they're putting out is absolute garbage. The Final Crisis Architect touched upon their exit from DC in a post published to their Substack page, wherein they provided a behind-the-scenes look into the chain of events that led them to signing on to write the Superman and the Authority miniseries. Opening with the blatant recollection that by the end of 2019, it was pretty much over between me and DC Comics, Morrison went on to discuss how at that point in their career, the writing of their departure was so obviously on the wall, there was more writing than the wall. Definitely not a positive thing to say. It says, while the back catalog stayed steady, monthly sales of new work were on the wane, and the kind of inventive and exuberant audience engagement that characterized the 2000s, when I was in the spotlight as the writer on various Batman titles, seemed in decline. I'd always considered my work in comics as a kind of live performance where the feedback was nearly instantaneous, but the cheers of the crowd were being replaced by a clearing of throats, a shuffling of feet, and although punctuated by the odd half-hearted yay, it was clear that Wednesday Warrior readers of DC superhero titles were less and less interested in what I had to sell, they added. Now, unfortunately, the quality of comics coming out of DC have gone downhill, and he's talking about when he left in 2019. In 2019, DC put out complete garbage, like Zoe Quinn's Goddess Mode series and Naomi, so it's no surprise to hear interest was declining. They weren't trying to focus on what fans wanted, and they still don't. They focus on what can push a narrative the best. What can they put out that they think is going to make people interested, get a new audience interested in their content? This is the type of stuff that they're now putting out that is also not selling. Climate change Superman. This was from February 7th. It says, despite Tom Taylor's deflection, new sales numbers show DC Comics' woke Superman is a loser, and it's no wonder why. This is not what people want to read, and unfortunately, this is the type of content that they've been pushing for years at this point now. However, Morrison noted that there was no ill will between themselves and the former publisher, as both of their final DC projects, their run on Green Lantern with Liam Sharp and the third and final volume of Wonder Woman Earth 1, shared the same message of optimism for the universe's future. So luckily it wasn't this big falling out, it wasn't this giant situation, which is always good behind the scenes, but obviously it didn't end very positively. At the time of Morrison's 2019 realization, though DC's lineup featured a few well-regarded series, such as Scott Snyder's run on Justice League Volume 4, Robert Vendetti's Freedom Fighters Volume 3, it was overwhelmingly marred by some of the publisher's most widely panned titles in recent years. And it is true, like I mentioned before, they put out absolute garbage in 2019. For the most part, it was one of the worst years for content, in my opinion. It says these include Kelly Sue DeConnick's run on Aquaman Volume 8, Tom King's run on Batman Volume 3, and King's Heroes in Crisis Event. It says further, 2019 also saw the debut of two since shuttered DC imprints in the relaunch of Vertigo, which debuted with such winners such as Border Town and Zoe Quinn's Goddess Mode, and the Brian Michael Bendis-led Wonder Comics, most notable for its introduction of Naomi to the DCU. And talking about 2019 failures for DC, this article actually came out a few weeks ago, back on January 11th. I did talk about it in another video, but it says John Della Rose exposes Zoe Quinn's dismal sales for her DC comic series Goddess Mode and her autobiography. I know if I saw a comic series with Zoe Quinn's name on it, I wouldn't support it. I wouldn't support an autobiography. I don't want to support anything that she's part of, and I know a lot of people agree, but these are the types of writers that they were getting back in 2019 and that they're still technically getting, but this is the type of content they thought was going to sell Goddess Mode, which sounds absolutely ridiculous. I haven't read it myself, but I've seen a lot of it over the years and it looks terrible. Unfortunately, just some really, really bad content here, and I would love for all of DC's content to be good because I love so many of the characters that DC has, but unfortunately, it wasn't just 2019 where there was bad content like this coming out. Even to this day, they are still putting out terrible content. They're not listening to consumers. They're not looking at feedback that people are giving them. They have double, triple, and quadrupled down on this terrible content over the past few years. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. I don't magically think that DC overnight is going to start listening to consumers and actually make good content again. Only time will tell. Maybe they'll end up deciding to listen to feedback and turn things around, but I highly doubt it. But I did think that this was pretty interesting to hear about Grant Morrison coming out and talking about their 2019 DC Comics exit. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.